In March of 2022, the COVID pandemic appeared to be ending, and I finally got to visit Israel and Jordan with my college friend Tony Quinn. Our tour company, Tauck, mapped out a route that looked like spaghetti thrown up against the wall. In a land with tricky border crossings and conflicting holy days of multiple religions, it took a master planner to figure out what was open and what was closed on any given day. We quarantined at the luxurious Intercontinental David Hotel in Tel Aviv while awaiting COVID test results and my delayed bag. Fortunately, we had a commanding view of the Mediterranean Sea, an inviting swimming pool below, and an artfully landscaped waterfront to look at. From our floor, we got a nice overview of downtown Tel Aviv, which is the economic and technological heart of Israel. 92% of its 460,000 residents are Jewish, and it has the highest per capita income in the Middle East. Finally, our tour began with a beautiful cocktail hour and welcoming dinner, where we got to meet the other 14 travelers on our trip. It was just the beginning of wonderful food everywhere we went, and our tour group proved to be most congenial. A walking tour of Tel Aviv the next day put us at street level. We found ourselves on Rothschild Boulevard, named for Baron Edmond de Rothschild of the French banking family. He was a strong Zionist whose financial support helped establish the Jewish homeland in Palestine. The boulevard named for him featured fountains and jacaranda trees. We had heard that Tel Aviv is a young people's city, a 24-hour-a-day party city. So we weren't surprised to find that ample provision had been made for scooters, bikes, and skateboards. Young professionals were flocking to Tel Aviv from all over the world. And as of the year 2013, the city was considered second only to the Silicon Valley as a place to start a high-tech business. We found the mix of architectural influences fascinating, a blend of Europe and the Middle East. Take a look. Most notable are buildings that reflect the German Bauhaus movement, a modernist style which was imported beginning in the 1920s and grew to influence more than 4,000 buildings in Tel Aviv. With the idea that form follows function, we began to look for buildings with clean, uncluttered lines, often with rounded corners, protruding balconies, long banks of windows, and no decoration. In a deviation from Bauhaus design, we find an understated McDonald's. It makes us feel right at home. If Tel Aviv is the new kid on the block, founded in 1909, the ancient seaport of Jaffa is its predecessor. In fact, it adjoins Tel Aviv, but Jaffa goes back to biblical times and is tied to the stories of Jonah, Solomon, and St. Peter. Here, our local guide, Or, shows us a view of Tel Aviv as seen from Jaffa. Actually, Tel Aviv grew out of Jaffa as a modern residential community of Jews, leaving Jaffa as a mixed city with about 37% of its population being Arab. As you see, the streets of Jaffa look very different from those of Tel Aviv. The Jaffa clock tower dominates the main street, but it's not really that old. Its cornerstone was laid in 1900, and it has been a work of art in progress ever since. A plaque was added to honor Israelis killed in the Battle for Jaffa in the 1948 Arab-Israeli War. And stained glass windows were added in 1966 to tell the story of Jaffa. As we explored Jaffa's old town, we came to its ever-popular flea market. It sprawls over several blocks. Tradition has defined its areas of specialty. High fashion for the ladies. Here in the carpet department, I caught a fleeting glimpse of our wonderful trip leader, Stephen Fisher. I'm sure there were bargains to be had, but carpets weren't on our shopping list. As we walked along Jaffa's narrow cobblestone streets, we came to a most unusual sculpture, a full-grown floating orange tree. Created in 1993, this installation continues to produce fruit. Now we come to Old Jaffa's largest and most imposing building, St. Peter's Church. Yes, it's Roman Catholic, with masses conducted in English, Spanish, Polish, and Hebrew, and its history goes back a few centuries. The architectural style is New Spanish Baroque, but what you see here sits where a medieval citadel had been erected in the 13th century. Since then, it was destroyed twice, and twice rebuilt, with the current church dating back to 1888. We ended our tour of Old Jaffa at the top of Peak Park, where we viewed an impressive sculpture called the Gate of Faith. The gate represents entry to the land of Israel, as had been promised to the patriarchs Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Our next stop was the Roman Empire. Well, not really, but Caesarea preserves an important part of it. By the way, the dotted line on this map separates Israel from the West Bank, which is administered by the Palestinian Authority. Leaving Tel Aviv and Jaffa, we passed some familiar industrial names and plants. And we saw where many residents are living, including incoming Jewish refugees from Ukraine. Soon we found ourselves at Caesarea National Park, and were pleased to see evidence of support for Ukraine as Russia began its brutal invasion. This scenic stretch of coastline on the Mediterranean Sea does not offer a natural deep-sea harbor, so in the years between 25 and 13 BC, King Herod the Great undertook to build one. He gave it the name Caesarea Maritima, and it became a thriving commercial port. In fact, it developed into a typical Roman city, complete with a palace, a pagan temple, a theater, amphitheater, hippodrome, and much more. Archaeologists have pieced together what Caesarea must have looked like before it fell to Muslim conquest in the 7th century. Here we see parts of statues, including one massive foot that suggests the size of the figure it belonged to, possibly Roman Emperor Caesar Augustus, for whom Herod named the city. We saw the ruins of columns, some of which were supporting remnants of what may have been covered walkways that surrounded pools and gardens. Now we are entering the theater of Caesarea, which has undergone enough restoration to make it usable, even today. The tiered seating can accommodate up to 3,000 patrons, and performances are held each summer. In Roman times, there would have been an ornamental wall behind the stage, but that's missing. Besides Herod, another familiar biblical name is that of Pontius Pilate, whose presence is documented on this dedication stone. He was the Roman prefect of Judea, who presided over the trial of Jesus. At the entrance to the hippodrome, we find public toilets, just begging for some memorable photography. Chariot races were held right here. 7 laps were run counterclockwise, with sharp turns at each end of the track. Charlton Heston would have felt at home. Modern abstract statuary seeks to capture the thrill of a chariot race. Structures dating from various periods of Caesarea's history reflect Roman, Byzantine, Muslim, and Crusader occupancy. We saw mosaic tile floors from Roman times, amazingly well preserved. and we viewed the governor's palace baths, dating from the Byzantine period. This strategic seaport was fortified with walls and a moat in 1251 by French King Louis IX during the Crusades. Finally, we were impressed with the Roman aqueduct that served Caesarea for 1,200 years. Herod built this high-level parallel aqueduct to bring water from springs 16 kilometers away. Little wonder Caesarea is regarded as the best-preserved Roman ruin in Israel. With the countries of Syria and Jordan to our east, we head north from Caesarea to the city of Haiffa, from which we will take day trips north to Akko and east to the Sea of Galilee and city of Nazareth. The city of Haiffa dates from the 18th century, and today is Israel's third largest city. It has a population of about 280,000, 90% of whom are Jewish. Haiffa is a major industrial and port city, and the entrance into Israel for immigrants. About a quarter of the population are recently arrived Russian Jews. Here's a familiar sight. Container ships parked as far as the eye can see, waiting to be loaded and unloaded. Our first stop in Haiffa was to the international headquarters of one of the least represented religions in Israel, the Baha'i faith, with its golden-domed shrine on Mount Carmel. If you want a challenging walk, you can climb up or down the 19 garden terraces. They're well manicured. Here's the view from below. The shrine holds the remains of the religion's Iranian founder, Baha'u'llah. The Bab, as he called himself, was considered not a god, but a herald, not unlike Jesus or Mohammed. The Baha'i faith has as many as 8 million adherents throughout the world. It preaches unity of all nations, races, creeds, and classes. Its purpose is not unlike that of the other major religions that believe in a single God, but it follows its own social practices. Sharing the slopes of Mount Carmel in Haiffa is a Carmelite monastery built over a cave believed to be where the prophet Elijah of the Old Testament took shelter. The exact location is unknown, but the Stella Maris Monastery claims this grotto as the Cave of Elijah. The church has been repurposed and rebuilt several times, but this latest building was opened in 1836. Our day ended with a panel discussion about how members of the Jewish, Muslim, Christian, and Baha'i faiths interact in Haifa. Meanwhile, on the docks, workers continued unloading and loading the steady stream of container ships that sustain this busy port. The next day was the start of the Jewish Sabbath. So what can a non-Jewish visitor do in Israel on the Sabbath? Drive to Nazareth, of course, the hometown of Jesus. We were surprised to learn that Nazareth is known today as the Arab capital of Israel. Almost 100% of its inhabitants are Arab, of which about 7 in 10 are Muslim, but 3 in 10 are Christian. The motor coach ride gave our local guide, Zivid, a chance to tell us about the Arab culture, and we were eager to learn about arranged marriages.
Know that this boy walked on the street and he saw this beautiful girl and he wanted to meet with her. It's all have to go through a matchmaker that will meet the families from both sides.
Will this couple have known each other though some way?
No,
like
not at all. Matchmaker will decide who is going to meet with whom. And the matchmaker are making a big research. Who are the family? Are they rich enough? Are they religious enough? What's the I don't know, the other kids are doing, with whom the other kids are married. And then after this research she is making, then she will go to the groom family and ask him if he wants to date or to meet someone, to the bride family to see.
Soon we found ourselves in the heart of Nazareth, where Jesus spent his boyhood. Seeing these young boys checking out a combo boxer game gives us a modern-day perspective, or should I say contrast. We see a mosque next door to our destination in Nazareth, but we came to visit the very modern, very Catholic Church of the Annunciation. It stands on the site believed to have been the home of the Virgin Mary, and where, according to the Gospel of St. John, the angel Gabriel appeared and told her that she would conceive and give birth to the Son of God. Above the church door, it says in Latin, "The Word was made flesh and dwelt amongst us." This current building was completed in 1969, but it was built over the site of earlier churches from the Byzantine, Crusader, and Israeli periods. The lower level contains the grotto of the Annunciation, holding what many believe to be the remnants of the original childhood home of Mary. The upper level is used for regular worship services and displays one of the largest pieces of mosaic artwork in the world. The upper level features many representations of Mary, contributed by countries with significant Catholic populations. Most of the images are mosaics, but some take on very different forms. The courtyard also displays a gallery of Madonnas. For example, this mosaic represents the Ukraine. Here's one from the Philippines. The Church of the Annunciation is operated by the Franciscans and is the largest Christian church building in the Middle East. Between the southern shore of the Sea of Galilee and the Jordan River, we come to a kibbutz. Not just any kibbutz, but the oldest one in Israel. Degania Aleph was founded about 112 years ago by Jewish immigrants, mostly from Russia and Eastern Europe, who set out in 1910 to create a collective farm or commune that would operate as a socialist paradise. Today there are more than 250 kibbutzim in Israel that are home to about 100,000 Jews. Degania Aleph has more than 500 residents, so you can imagine the scale of farming it can undertake. We visit a small museum on the farm where a guide describes kibbutz life. It turns out, not all kibbutzim are agricultural. Some are industrial, or a mixture. Most hold all wealth in common, reinvesting the profits, but providing all members with the basics of life: food, clothing, shelter, education, medical services, and social needs. Adults live by themselves, but children are generally cared for as a group. Cooking, dining, and cleaning up are shared activities, and each kibbutz is self-governing. Variations on this structure have evolved, but kibbutz life continues to contribute not only to Israel's economy, but to the nation's way of thinking about certain social services. This wall honors men and women from Degania Aleph, who died in Israel's wars for independence. Before taking a cruise on the Sea of Galilee, we visit a museum run by a neighboring kibbutz that displays a boat we wouldn't want to ride in today. The ancient Galilee boat was discovered in 1986, when a drought caused water levels to drop. It has been dated to the 1st century AD, coincidentally the time of Jesus and his disciples, some of whom were fishermen and would use a boat like this. The boat, which is 27 feet long and 7.5 feet wide, served as inspiration for the modern replica we were about to board. Today, the Sea of Galilee is still used for fishing and is a popular destination for tourism and, of course, recreation. The length of the Sea of Galilee is about 13 miles north to south, and most of the water comes from the Jordan River at the north end. That means that the Sea of Galilee is not a saltwater sea, but a freshwater lake. In fact, it's the lowest freshwater lake on Earth. Here we are about 700 feet below sea level. The mountain range across the lake is the Golan Heights, an area conquered by Israel in the 1967 Six-Day War. So today the Sea of Galilee no longer forms the border between Israel and Syria. To Christians, the Sea of Galilee is well known for its role in the life of Jesus. Jesus is said to have recruited several fishermen to become his disciples and fishers of men. Christians believe that this is where he walked on water, calmed a storm, and fed the masses with a few loaves and fishes. From our boat, we could see the Church of the Beatitudes, located on a hill where Jesus is said to have delivered his Sermon on the Mount. As we returned to shore, some of our group decided to dance the hor, the traditional Jewish wedding dance, Hava Nagila. The remnants of thick walls surround this ancient port city on the northern coast of Israel. We are in Akko, known in the Bible as Acre, to visit a city that has been controlled for more than 2,000 years, off and on, by Egyptian, Greek, Roman, Byzantine, Crusader, Islamic, Ottoman, British, and Israeli rulers. The modern city of Akko has about 49,000 residents. But our visit focused on the 12th and 13th centuries when Christian crusaders fought to take back the Holy Land from the Muslims. Military expeditions sent by European monarchs and the Roman Catholic Church built an extensive fortress compound in Akko, part of which survives today. From the courtyard of the citadel, we see a nearby mosque, reminding us of the enduring Islamic presence in this part of Israel. But our attention turns now to the Akko prison that was in active use well into the 20th century. In fact, our guide Zivit told us that her father was one of several Jews imprisoned there for a short time during the British Mandate, which ended in 1948. An early map traces the many expeditions of the Crusades during the Middle Ages, showing Jerusalem prominently as the focal point. We enter now a great hall, which is believed to have been the refectory or dining hall of the complex. Its Gothic vaulting reminds us of Europe's cathedrals. The military monastic order known as the Knights Templar had been driven from Jerusalem, where they had guarded the Temple Mount, and took charge of protecting pilgrims at Akko in what is now called a hospitaller fortress. As we wander through the Knights' halls, we see banners of the Crusaders. This one represents Richard the Lionheart, who led forces of the Third Crusade. Other halls have been restored and enhanced with mural art and dramatic lighting that portrays Crusader scenes. Here's a market street, as it might have appeared in medieval times. You are invited to take a walk. A tunnel was built leading from the fortress to the port, a distance of 350 meters. It provided a protected way to move supplies. The lower part is hewn out of rock, but the upper part and arch are built out of stones. The tunnel was discovered in 1994 when a woman living above it complained about a blocked sewer. Clearly, there's more of this fortress to be excavated. Our path takes us through what's called the Enchanted Garden as we head over to the nearby mosque. The great Mosque of Al-Aqsa was built in 1781 and is unrivaled for its beauty. The smaller structure you see here covers the source of fresh water for the mosque. We were fortunate to be able to go inside. The mosque is closed to visitors 5 times daily for prayers. Within the old city of Akko, about 95% of the residents are Arab. Outside of the old city, the Arab population drops to about 1/3. The other dominant faiths are Jewish, Christian, Druze, and believe it or not, Baha'i. When we leave the mosque, we find ourselves in old Akko's lively markets. The city's many cultural heritages are represented here. But enough talk. Feel free to browse. There are coffees for every taste, and lots of spices to choose from. Family dining is informal in the old city market. But we were in for an unexpected treat. Uri Buri is a fish and seafood restaurant that is world class. The newly renovated exterior doesn't look that special, but Uri Buri is currently rated by TripAdvisor as number 19 on its list of the best fine dining restaurants in the world. Uri Jeremias is the name of the owner and creative chef who brings a lifetime of culinary experience to Old Akko as he seeks to celebrate the foods of the Galilee. He loves to greet his customers in person, and I was lucky enough to be one of them. Having completed our visit to Caesarea, Haiffa, Nazareth, the Sea of Galilee, and Akko, we head south to central Israel and Jerusalem. Note that the dotted line denoting the Palestinian-administered West Bank goes right through Jerusalem. In fact, nearby Bethlehem is located in the restricted West Bank. Meanwhile, we will be living like kings in the 5-star Waldorf Astoria Hotel, a Hilton property. Here's the view of Jerusalem from my room. We're right downtown at the edge of the old city, just steps from the Jaffa gate and the thousands of years of history behind it. Take a look around at our home for the next 5 nights. The food and service were equal to the ambiance. Toward the end of our stay, we were joined by a wedding party. But alas, we weren't invited. Of course, if we wanted to stay on, the Waldorf Astoria has condos for sale. But enough of that. We have sightseeing to do. Across the street is one of the largest Roman Catholic churches in Jerusalem, the St. Vincent de Paul Chapel, which we were told includes a school for severely handicapped children. From there, we ventured onto Mamilla Mall, an open-air passageway that offers upscale shopping opportunities. We're heading for the old city, but are still outside the wall, or should I say walls. In Jerusalem, newer walls have been built alongside or on top of older walls. You see them when you're driving, or when you're walking. The most protective walls and city gates were built by the Ottoman Empire in the early 16th century. But predating those were fortified structures such as the Tower of David you see here, also known as the Citadel, that formed part of the wall. Its predecessors dated back to the time of Herod the Great, under Roman rule. Now we approach the Jaffa gate through the wall into the old city, entering from the west. Again, shopping awaits, but it takes on a less exclusive character. I must admit, I tried a falafel and liked it. It's like a fried hush puppy, but made with ground chickpeas. Many consider it the national dish of Israel. Others in our tour group ordered shawarma, which turned out to be meat wrapped in flatbread. As we prepare to enter the Citadel, our Jerusalem guide, Shelley, gives us an overview of the city.
Now that we have everything here, we have layers and layers of history, but we have a living city where people live. Jerusalem is declared by Israel the capital of the state of Israel. It's the largest of our cities with over 900,000 people living here. The old city itself is maybe 40 or 50,000, okay? Most of the people live outside the walls of the city, and it's a city, again, only to the three great monotheistic faiths, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam.
The high ramparts of the citadel give us not only an iconic view of the Tower of David, but a sweeping panorama of the historic walled city. As we look to the east, we see a golden dome known as Dome of the Rock. Behind it rises the Mount of Olives. As we turn northeast, we see the gray domes of the Church of the Holy Sepulcher. Dome of the Rock is atop Temple Mount, which is sacred to Jews. But Dome of the Rock itself and the al-Aqsa Mosque alongside it are sacred to Islam. The Church of the Holy Sepulcher is sacred to Christians. The walls of the citadel we see today were built by Herod 2,000 years ago. Take a look at the remains of a palace he built at that same time. Archaeologists have even found a quarry dated to the First Temple period, that is, nearly 1000 BC, when King Solomon ruled. Jerusalem is dripping with history, layers of it. We now embark on a walking tour of the Jewish quarter in the Old City. In addition to a Jewish quarter, Jerusalem has a Muslim quarter, a Christian quarter, and an Armenian quarter. The Armenians practice their own variation of Orthodox Christianity. After following picturesque narrow passageways, we come to Haiffa Square. Its large golden menorah is a well-recognized symbol of Judaism and an emblem of Israel. It stands outside the reconstructed Haiffa Synagogue, which is one of 4 related synagogues that serve Sephardic Jews, who are descended from the 250,000 Jews who were expelled from Spain in 1492. We visited the connected Yohanan ben Zakkai Synagogue, where we got to observe the Torah being laboriously copied by hand. This scribe will spend up to a year and a half duplicating one Torah scroll in biblical Hebrew. We asked him to read a brief passage out loud, and he was happy to do so, following the words from right to left. We were told that it's typical for synagogues to seat men on the main floor and women in balconies above. But Jewish women are gaining rights. They are now welcome to pray at the Wailing Wall, but in a partitioned area separate from the men. Jerusalem's Western Wall is the holiest site in the world for Judaism, and it acquired the name Wailing Wall because it's common for Jews to weep here as they pray over the loss of Jerusalem to the Romans. This section of the wall is all that remains standing of this Second Temple complex that dates back to the time of King Herod. Today, visitors like us, regardless of faith, are welcome to write prayers on slips of paper and insert them into the cracks on the wall. So we did. We marveled to learn that the Second Temple was built over what tradition says was a First Temple, dating from the time of King Solomon in 1000 BC. No telling of the Jewish story would be complete in Jerusalem without a visit to the Holocaust History Museum, or as it's known in Hebrew, Yad Vashem. Once inside, our tour guide gave us a very moving tribute to the 6 million Jews who were killed by the Nazis in World War II. The disturbing photographs and exhibits we saw were only the most visible elements of the deep archives and ongoing research work of this museum. We passed the Damascus Gate as we followed the wall around the Old City. It was built in 1537, but below it we could see an earlier entrance. we were told it dates back to the time of Roman Emperor Hadrian in the 2nd century AD. Truly, Jerusalem is built in layers. Here's a Roman Catholic church, the Church of All Nations, that's perched on the side of the Mount of Olives, next to the Garden of Gethsemane. Its location is significant because that's where they say Jesus prayed before being arrested. Nearby, also on the Mount of Olives, is a large Jewish cemetery containing about 70,000 graves. Legend has it that those who are lucky enough to be buried here will be the first to be resurrected on the day of the resurrection of the dead. As we approached the wall of the old city, we came upon an excavation. Our guide said that we were looking at a ground level from 2,000 years ago. That would coincide with the time of the Second Temple, which was destroyed by the Romans in 70 AD. But the First and Second Temples had been located not here, but up on Temple Mount. So that was our next stop. We entered through the west wall and went upstairs to the courtyard of the Islamic Museum to get oriented. The iconic centerpiece of Temple Mount is the stunning Dome of the Rock. We won't see the ancient Jewish temples built by Solomon and Herod up here. They're long gone and supported more by faith than archaeology. But according to Judeo-Christian tradition, the Temple Mount is where Abraham came to sacrifice Isaac. And for Muslims, this is where the Prophet Muhammad ascended to heaven, making Temple Mount, or what Muslims call Haram al-Sharif, the third holiest place for Muslims after Mecca and Medina. So all three of the world's major monotheistic religions have a claim on this site, which our guide called the most contested piece of real estate on earth. The result is an uneasy division of authority between the Palestinians and Israelis, whereby the Muslim community manages the site under the religious authority of the Islamic government of Jordan, and Israel provides security, but peace is often interrupted. Exactly 1 month after our visit, access to Temple Mount was closed when clashes erupted between Palestinians and the Israeli security forces. The nearby al-Aqsa Mosque was ground zero for the conflict. Our timing proved to be fortunate. This is the same mosque where, in 1951, King Abdullah I of Jordan was assassinated, and his 14-year-old grandson was injured. But the boy grew up to become the famous King Hussein, who ruled Jordan for nearly half a century. The plaza in front of the al-Aqsa Mosque can hold 300,000 worshippers, making it one of the world's largest mosques. Let's take a closer look at the magnificent Dome of the Rock, which is part of the al-Aqsa Mosque compound. This 8-sided shrine was built in 688 AD by the Muslim rulers of Jerusalem, but it has been expanded and refined over the centuries. The sides are covered with marble at the bottom and glazed tiles at the top. The structural cylinder that supports the dome is inside, forming an inner drum. Today's dome is covered with gold-plated copper panels. The incredible detail and color of the tiles make it the most recognizable building in Jerusalem. Now we leave Temple Mount and continue exploring the Old City. We come to the Syriac Orthodox monastery of St. Mark, which is one of 2 sites claiming to be where Jesus and his disciples had their Last Supper. The Via Dolorosa, or Way of Sorrow, draws Christian pilgrims to follow the path Jesus took to his crucifixion through what tradition has defined as 14 stations of the cross. At the first station, we find the Church of the Condemnation and Imposition of the Cross. Within this Franciscan church is the second station, the Church of the Flagellation, where Jesus carries his cross. Station 3 is located next to an Armenian Catholic chapel, and represents where Jesus fell under the weight of the cross for the first time. Station 4 marks the place where Jesus meets his mother Mary as she stood by the road. Now we detour through the Muslim quarter under the watchful eye of security. Shopping opportunities abound, but we continue on our mission. Back on the Via Dolorosa, we come to Station 5, which is located at a Franciscan chapel that marks the point where Simon of Cyrene helps Jesus carry the cross. From there, the path would ascend steeply to Calvary, where the crucifixion would take place. So, we detoured again through the Muslim quarter, marveling at the busy, narrow streets and the lively flow of school children. Station 6 brings us to a chapel of the Little Sisters of Jesus. It marks the traditional site of Veronica's house, where she is said to have wiped the sweat from Jesus' face. At Station 7, Jesus fell for a second time, as memorialized on a Roman column housed in this Franciscan chapel. At Station 8, Jesus is remembered for having consoled the women of Jerusalem. In the shadow of the Church of the Holy Sepulcher, we find Station 9, where Jesus fell for the third time. Before going into the Church of the Holy Sepulcher, we went to its rooftop, where we found an Ethiopian monastery, known as Deir al-Sultan, maintaining their claim to access going back to the 4th century. When we were allowed to look inside their makeshift chapel, we felt we had entered another world. Returning to Via Dolorosa, we found Station 10 unmarked, but said to be located in this inner courtyard of the Church of the Holy Sepulcher. Tradition tells us this is where Jesus was stripped of his garments. We will find the final 4 stations inside the church, as this marks the location where Jesus was believed to have been crucified and entombed. But let's go in properly through the front entrance. Oops, bad timing. As we learned on the evening news, the press was interviewing the Greek Orthodox Patriarch about a restoration and archaeological excavation project that had just been announced. After 30 years of negotiation, agreement had finally been reached between the various faith communities that jointly administer the church: the Greek, Armenian, and Coptic Orthodox churches, and the Roman Catholic Church. The Christian religion can be complicated. Continuing our Via Dolorosa quest, we find Station 11 in the main Roman Catholic place of worship. A mosaic above the altar depicts Jesus being nailed to the cross within sight of his mother. Station 12 is in the next chapel over, which has been situated by the Greek Orthodox Church directly over the place where Jesus died on the cross. This area was originally a quarry, and the stone you see here represents the Rock of Calvary, located on the hill of Golgotha. Station 13 is the Stone of Anointment, which is where they placed Jesus when he was taken down from the cross. It's thought to be the actual marble slab on which Jesus' body lay, and it attracts a steady stream of the faithful who come to touch the stone and pray. Finally, we come to Station 14, where there's always a line of worshipers who wish to see where Jesus was laid in the tomb. A monumental shrine called the Edicule, which means a small house, has been built over the tomb. The tomb itself is what we call the Holy Sepulcher. Going down several levels, we entered a cave where we saw several holes in the rock walls of the type that were used for burials in the time of Jesus. Some say there should be a 15th Station of the Cross, commemorating Jesus' resurrection. But then we'd have to rename the Via Dolorosa to reflect joy rather than sorrow. I'll leave that to religious scholars to debate as we explore a few of the many chapels and altars that fill this massive basilica. The Church of the Holy Sepulchre was begun in the 4th century A.D. by the Emperor Constantine and has been expanded over the centuries. The dominant architectural influence is Byzantine, characterized by domes and arches. The upcoming restoration and excavation project is a big deal, since nobody really knows what lies beneath the paved floors which have never been excavated. So stay tuned. The Israel Museum is our next stop, where we will examine fragments of the Dead Sea Scrolls and see a gigantic model of Jerusalem in the Second Temple period. From the museum, we have a view of the Knesset, Israel's parliament. Its 120 members are chosen in national elections involving multiple parties, which must somehow form a governing coalition. Beneath this urn-shaped roof is the Shrine of the Book. It houses most of the Dead Sea Scrolls, which date from the 3rd century BC through the 1st century AD. A facsimile of the complete Isaiah scroll is showcased in a gigantic circular display. The original scroll was written on parchment and dates from the 1st century AD. It seems that in 1946 or 47, a Bedouin shepherd boy threw a rock into a cave near the northwest shore of the Dead Sea. He heard something shatter, went to investigate, and found a collection of clay jars, some of which contained leather and papyrus scrolls. By the time archaeologists expanded the discovery, they had found 981 manuscripts from 11 caves. Fragments came from nearly all books of the Old Testament, plus other writings of the period. Significantly, they show how accurately the Hebrew Bible has been transcribed over time. Now, imagine you are on Temple Mount and are looking at the Second Temple as greatly expanded by King Herod. This massive model of Jerusalem adjoins the Israel Museum on its 20-acre campus. The temple lasted 585 years before its destruction by the Romans in 70 AD. All that remains is a portion of the western wall, popularly known as the Wailing Wall. The model, which captures both the topography and architectural character of the city, was built on a 50-to-1 scale. Besides being very large, covering 22,000 square feet, it is incredibly detailed. See for yourself. Israeli historian and geographer Michael Avid designed and built the model based largely on the writings of Flavius Josephus, a 1st century Jewish priest, scholar, and historian. He was describing the city as he knew it at the time. We saw only a fraction of what the Israel Museum has to offer. It was established in 1965 as the nation's leading cultural institution, and its collections focus on art and archaeology. Now it's nighttime, and we stroll down the Mamilla Mall to return to the Old City for a sound and light show at the Tower of David Museum. Once we enter the Jaffa Gate, the shops beckon, and we can't resist. Finally, we take our seats with a good view of the ancient citadel walls on which the night spectacular will be projected. With rich booming sound, original music, and colorful moving images, we are taken through 13 periods of Jerusalem's storied history, and we are reminded of the many cultures, religions, rulers, and legends that have shaped this city for thousands of years. The next morning we were off to Bethlehem to visit the Church of the Nativity, which was built on the place where tradition says Jesus was born. For this visit, we will venture outside of our comfort zone and pass through a West Bank checkpoint into Palestinian-controlled Bethlehem. Upon approach, we see that the little town of Bethlehem isn't so little anymore. In fact, it's a city of about 30,000, predominantly Orthodox Christian, but secondarily Muslim. Our local guide, Ramzi, was an Arab Christian. He explained that the church, or Basilica of the Nativity, was built by the Roman Emperor Constantine in 330 AD and expanded by the Byzantine Emperor Justinian in 527 AD. It's positioned directly over the cave that served as a stable, believed to contain the manger where Jesus was born. So where is the front door, you ask? Well, you're looking at it. The Crusaders lowered the entrance in about the year 1500 to keep looters and their carts from coming in. Today, it's known as the humility door, requiring us to bow down before entering the church. Inside, the decor, icons, and lamps are decidedly Greek Orthodox. But actually, ownership of the church is shared by the Greek Orthodox, Roman Catholic, and Armenian Orthodox faiths. We took turns entering the grotto beneath the church and crawling below the altar to view an inlaid silver star that marks the birthplace. But we may have overstayed our welcome. A service was about to begin. After that, the chanting commenced, and we could only listen. Apparently, access to the grotto chapel is jealously divvied up among the competing priests. So, we spent our time looking around at what is believed to be the oldest complete church in the Christian world. There are wall mosaics dating from the 12th century, depicting saints, angels, and church leaders. The red pillars are of locally quarried limestone, some of which still display Crusader paintings of saints. The distinctive hanging lamps let us know right away that we are in an Orthodox church, not a Roman Catholic one. Of particular note is a mosaic on the floor, protected under glass, that dates back to the original church built by Constantine in the 4th century. But if Roman Catholics are part owners of this basilica, where do they fit in? Well, a part of the Church of the Nativity, literally sharing a wall, is the Church of St. Catherine. It's much newer, built in 1882, on ruins of the Crusader church that also sat atop underground caves and chambers carved out of the rock. The window above its altar celebrates the birth of Jesus. When we took the stairs down, we found the cave of St. Jerome, where this hermit monk spent more than 20 years translating the Bible from Greek and Hebrew to Latin. The Vulgate version of the Bible he completed in 405 AD became the first major book printed with movable type, the Gutenberg Bible, more than 1,000 years later in 1456. And guess what? St. Jerome's Vulgate Bible is still in print. You can even read it on Kindle. Back on the street, we have a view of Church of the Nativity's nearest neighbor, the Mosque of Omar, which dates from 1860. And not surprisingly, nearby souvenir shops feature religious carvings using olive wood, a Bethlehem specialty. PLO flags in front of City Hall remind us that Bethlehem is self-governed by the Palestinian Authority. PLO founder Yasser Arafat, who died in 2004, and current leader Mahmoud Abbas are pictured at the local police station. As for adherence to international trademark law, Judge for yourself whether this local coffee shop creates confusion in the marketplace. Enough civilization. Let's drive south to a remote place called Masada. And let's go back to the Second Temple period. King Herod has just gained control of his kingdom. It's about 37 BC, and he's looking for a place far removed from a city. So he heads into the Judea desert. He's looking for a high mesa with a great water view, something like the Dead Sea. He doesn't care that the Dead Sea is really a lake that's 10 times saltier than the ocean. He didn't want to fish anyway. He just wanted security, which he could get by building on top of an isolated plateau 1,500 feet above the surface of the water. He found Masada, which is our next stop, back in Israel. It's a national park now, and it has a story to tell. Today, Masada gets about 750,000 visitors a year. But when Herod spotted this flat-topped mountain, access looked difficult. And that's what he liked. On this model, you can see that there are no easy ways up. One of our group undertook the snake path, but it took him a while. We found a better route to the top, a way not available to King Herod. We were rewarded with dramatic, sweeping views of the desert and the Dead Sea. We made our way toward one of 2 palaces Herod built, this one on a cliff with a scenic overview. He liked the vista so much, he built his palace on not 1 but 3 levels. No easy feat. If the countryside looks a little dry, it is. Only about 4 inches of rain fall in this area each year, sporadically creating a flow in dry creek beds like this one. To capture the winter rainfall, Herod had cisterns carved from the rock and connected them to an elaborate system of channels. He needed water for his swimming pool, believe it or not, and his Roman-style baths. Did I mention that Herod enjoyed his little luxuries? Brightly painted walls added to the decor, as did tile floors. Imagine a floor placed on top of these columns. The perfect temperature could then be maintained with water below. This is a mock-up of how water was routed behind the walls to assure the comfort of King Herod's spa. I promised you a story, so listen up to learn what happened after Herod's death and the annexation of Judea to the Roman Empire in 6 AD. The Romans stationed a garrison at Masada, but 60 years later, the fortress was taken over by Jewish zealots, who turned the former stable you see here into a synagogue, and remodeled Herod's baths to meet the requirements of Jewish rituals. Take a look around as I continue the story. In 70 AD, the Romans destroyed Jerusalem's Second Temple. That brought another wave of Jewish rebels to Masada, seeking safety. Rome was on the march, and in about 74 AD, they laid siege to Masada as the last rebel stronghold in Judea. Reportedly, they staged 8,000 troops around the base, and after several months of siege, began to breach the wall with a battering ram. Here's where the story becomes either heroic or unbelievable. The rebel leader Eleazar ben Yair reportedly persuaded his 960 Jewish followers on Masada to commit mass suicide with these words: "Let our wives die before they are abused, and our children before they have tasted slavery. And after we have slain them, let us bestow that glorious benefit upon one another. The Romans will know we have preferred death before slavery." Archaeologists have not been able to find more than a couple of dozen skeletons, but the story continues to inspire Israel and its military leadership to this day. Meanwhile, starlings like these have been present at Masada for thousands of years. Perhaps their ancestors were witness to the truth. From Masada, we headed north along the Dead Sea to cross the Jordan River going east. So it was goodbye to Israel and hello to Jordan. We are staying at the Movenpick Dead Sea Resort and Spa, from which we'll do some local sightseeing. Our visit started with a proper welcome. The resort itself is sprawling and impressive. I can give you a tease, but I can't do it justice. My room is right on the pool. I even have a sheltered enclave. But the March weather's a little chilly for swimming. Tourism is not yet back after the COVID pandemic. However, these year-round guests are perfectly content. Our dinner was preceded by a cooking class, where we learned how to make baba ganoush dip, and araye, a seasoned meat stuffing to enjoy with pita bread. Our culinary mistakes were nicely obscured with wine. After dinner, cocktails were offered on the patio, along with Middle Eastern entertainment. The next morning, we were on our way to antiquity, but we got a glimpse of contemporary Jordan en route. We passed a modern convention center, which had been host to the World Economic Forum, normally held in Davos, Switzerland. We discovered firsthand that Bedouins have the right-of-way. I shouldn't say this, but small business in the Third World looks the same everywhere. Mass housing also seems to follow a familiar model. We passed through agricultural countryside. Then we dropped back a few centuries to see the Greco-Roman settlement at Jerash. The biblical name was Dolorosa, but both the archaeological site and modern city are now known as Jerash. The Greek, Roman, and Byzantine ruins we're about to see are considered some of the largest and best preserved in the world. In fact, Jerash has been called the Pompeii of the East because it too suffered a cataclysmic event. Most of its structures were destroyed by an earthquake in 749 AD. But fortunately, we're still able to marvel at its large oval plaza or forum, surrounded by an impressive Ionic colonnade. It won't surprise you to know that Jerash is also nicknamed the City of 1,000 Columns. Look down and you can see examples of both Roman and Greek paving. I was told these are the original stones. The older Greek paving is crude by comparison. Most structures we will see date from the 2nd century AD. For example, Roman Emperor Hadrian stayed in Jerash during the winter of 129 AD, and the result was this triumphal arch that bears his name. Next to Hadrian's Arch, we find the Hippodrome, where races and athletic events were staged. We're standing on the side that would be lined with spectators. Here's a fancy entrance to the Hippodrome. If you time your visit right, you'll be able to attend a reenactment of the chariot races, 7 times around the oval with horses at full speed. The Hippodrome was surrounded by buildings that served as stables and even shops. Here's a shop with a well-preserved mosaic floor. Later, some of these buildings were used for storage. Nearby, excavators also found a tomb. Bridges like the one on the right connected the ancient city to the more modern Jerash. Of course, every self-respecting community had a wall. Here's part of one that protected Jerash. And where there are walls, there are gates. This is a very elaborate one. The Romans built temples to Artemis and Zeus, but this one is missing a few pieces. Yet it's fun to imagine its grandeur when it served a population estimated between 10 and 25,000, around 175 AD. These very extensive baths of Flaccus came a little later and were constructed under Byzantine rule in about 455 AD. Here's another impressive water monument, the Roman Nymphaeum, built in 191 AD to supply the people's water needs. The fountain was fed by an aqueduct. Then it routed the water through carved lions' heads into basins below. Now it's time to take a walk on the Cardo, which is the main road of the city. Romans always built their roads flawlessly straight. The column style switches from Ionic to Corinthian as it exits the oval plaza and leads to a city gate. Note that the stones here are placed at angles to make it somewhat easier to push a cart. Beneath the Cardo, about 3 feet down, runs a storm sewer. And this round stone provides access. Now we come to a 4-way stop, where a crossroad meets the Cardo. Traffic engineers would feel right at home. The fancier the columns, the more likely we are to be in a shopping area. This one's a beauty. It's amazing to find such rich details still visible after 2,000 years. Now we're entering the South Theater, which dates back to 90 AD and seats up to 3,000 spectators. We found that the acoustics are remarkable. Seating appears to have been reserved, judging by the markings carved on the seats. As for the bagpipe entertainment, I think we can assume that's a legacy of the British mandate over Transjordan that ended in 1946. With my Scots-Irish heritage, the piper made me feel right at home. As we concluded our visit to Jerash, it was apparent that there's more work to be done. Lots more pieces of the puzzle to be identified and assembled. It's comforting to know that security is keeping careful watch over antiquities in Jordan. After all, this area was settled by humans as early as the Neolithic period between 7500 and 5500 BC. It would be a shame to disrupt that continuity. Now imagine you are the prophet Moses in search of the Promised Land. You're crossing what seems like endless desert. Today you see an occasional Bedouin tent or nomadic settlement, maybe even a herd of their goats. After all, the Bedouins have roamed these deserts of Jordan and Israel for centuries. It's logical that their ancestors would have been present when biblical tradition says that Moses ascended Mount Nebo to view the Promised Land. That's where he's believed to have died, in 1271 BC. From the summit at 2,700 feet, Moses would have had a panorama of the West Bank across the Jordan River Valley. Today, from this vantage point on a clear day, we can see Bethlehem, the oasis of Jericho, and even the Mount of Olives in Jerusalem. What we call the Holy Land is really quite compact. Early Christian pilgrims built a church here in the 4th century AD, and some of the original stones from that church can still be seen. Then, in the 5th and 6th centuries, the basilica was expanded, and today, after excavation and reconstruction by the Franciscans, the Moses Memorial Church houses some of the best Byzantine mosaics in Jordan. They cover the walls, and they fill the museum. Most are fragments. Only the masterpiece on the floor is intact, and that's because it was hidden. It depicts a hunting and herding scene with a variety of wild animals. The color and detail are remarkable. As shameless tourists, we couldn't resist memorializing our visit. Our next stop is the town of Madaba, where we are visiting the Greek Orthodox Church of St. George. As our local guide Aziz explained, we would find a remarkable 6th century map of the Holy Land, done entirely in mosaics. It's displayed on the floor of the church, not oriented to the north, but facing east toward the altar. This massive Byzantine floor map covers an area of about 52 feet by 16 feet. It depicts 157 biblical sites from Egypt to Palestine, labeling them with Greek captions. The church itself is much newer than the map. Based on the locations shown, archaeologists determined that the map was created between 542 and 570 AD. An earthquake largely destroyed Madaba and the original church in 746, and the town was abandoned. During construction of a new Greek Orthodox church on the ancient site in 1884, the mosaic was rediscovered. The Church of St. George itself is beautiful, a home worthy of showcasing the oldest known map of the Holy Land. The artwork is rich and a magnet for our cameras. Of course, the legendary St. George himself is shown slaying the dragon that had demanded human sacrifice. As we prepared to leave Madaba, we passed a well-stocked souvenir shop that featured, of all things, an Arab Barbie doll. Maybe someday it too will be unearthed as an artifact of 21st century culture. As we continue south on the King's Way toward Petra, we enjoy an ever-changing view of the countryside. We pass orchards and cultivated lands that clearly challenge the desert. We drive by commercial areas that line the highway. And we puzzle over buildings that appear to be awaiting the addition of a second or third floor. In fact, they are. We were told that leaving columns and rebar exposed on the roof reflects hope for the future, that economic conditions will improve so that another floor can be added, or that a family member will someday marry and want to remain close. As we near our destination, we pass what looks like the ruins of a classic castle. Behind it, in the distance, we see power-generating windmills. Quite a contrast. It turns out that the castle is called Shobak, a remote Crusader fortress that was built in 1115 AD. Its strategic location on the main caravan route between Egypt and Syria allowed it to collect taxes from traders. Shobak was one of the last Crusader castles to fall. It was under siege for months, but held on because it had its own water supply. It turns out its defenders had dug a tunnel down the hill to reach 2 spring-fed cisterns. Today, excavation remains incomplete. Welcome to Petra, the UNESCO World Heritage Site we had come to see. Our hotel is in the nearby town of Wadi Musa, and it's another beautiful move-and-pick resort property. See for yourself. It presents a most impressive lobby with a mosaic tiled fountain, a warm, inviting bar with a richly decorated wall of Islamic gold design, and a tempting breakfast buffet that looks both artful and delicious. Meanwhile, the town outside awaits, and the hotel swimming pool beckons. But the March weather is still a little chilly, and we are anxious to dive into archaeology. So we check out a map of the amazing 2,000-year-old city of Petra, which covers 100 square miles of high desert. More than we can see on foot, but we will explore the heart of it. Beginning in the 4th century BC, a nomadic tribe called the Nabateans began settling here to be close to trade routes. They succeeded in establishing their capital as a major trading hub. They carved their homes and tombs and temples into the sandstone cliffs. Local Bedouins used to occupy some of these man-made caves. Petra has been called the Rose City because of the colorful, sometimes pinkish hues of its rugged terrain and rock formations. Here we're looking at a tomb with a typical carving above the opening. It's fun to imagine that if the right side represents a stairway to heaven, the left side portrays the other possibility. Now we come to the obelisk tomb, occupying 2 levels, with 4 pyramid-shaped pillars on top. It dates from 40 to 70 AD, and was the mausoleum of a Nabatean king and his descendants. Meanwhile, it's good to know Uber and Lyft are standing by in case their services are needed. Now we enter a narrow passage that is the start of a 3/4 mile long walk through a canyon called al-Aqsa. Here we'll see one of the things Petra is famous for, an innovative water channeling system that made life in the desert possible. Look closely and you can see how a path for the water has been carved in the rock. Cisterns and reservoirs captured rainwater and made it available to grow food and for people and livestock to drink. At its extreme, the al-Aqsa passageway becomes very narrow and very tall. Falling boulders are always a danger, but this one has been secured with cables. Look closely and pray. Some of the carvings, structures, and votive niches we saw were to honor gods. Nabatean people were polytheistic and worshipped local gods as well as certain Greek and Roman gods. They built temples, made ritual sacrifices to their gods, and believed in life after death. Here we see original Roman paving stones. Along the side, an irrigation channel continues. Scenery like this makes me think of Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. That's just one of many movies that have been filmed in Petra. That said, I'm ready for my scream test. Now we get our first peek at the iconic symbol of Petra, the treasury. Wait for it. You won't be disappointed. This magnificent facade was literally carved out of rock, the reddish sandstone that defines many of the monuments, temples, and royal tombs of Petra. Look at the detail in the statues and in the capitals of these Corinthian columns, which are carved and don't really hold up anything. The height is that of a 15-story building. There's nothing inside for these costumed Roman guards to protect, so they keep an eye on today's camel caravans, which carry tourists instead of spices, ivory, precious metals, and silk. Enjoy a little camel watching yourself as I share some highlights of Petra's history. The Nabatean kingdom was a client state of the Roman Empire in the 1st century BC, but lost its independence in 106 AD, when Rome took it over completely. Petra prospered under Roman rule until much of the city was destroyed by an earthquake in 323 AD. Then trade routes started shifting from land to sea, and by the middle of the 7th century, Petra was largely deserted. In good times, the population had exceeded 20,000. More than 1,000 years later, the ruins of Petra were discovered by a Swiss explorer in 1812. Petra's Roman legacy included more than facades. Here's a large Roman-style theater that could seat up to 8,000 people. It followed the traditional Roman model, except that the seats were carved out of stone rather than built. Where there are tourists, you can count on merchants. Colorful blankets command attention. This stand is selling all manner of spices. And next to it, frankincense, incense, and myrrh. A Bedouin goat herder adds a bit of local color to the scene. This row of royal tombs provided an impressive setting for large gatherings and celebrations. At the end of this mausoleum row, we find the magnificent urn tomb with its two-story substructure of arched vaults. These steps lead up to what was the Great Temple, a freestanding complex that may have served as a royal reception hall. And now we approach a monumental Roman gate, complete with formidable-looking guards. But thankfully, no passports were demanded. There are more than 500 monuments in Petra, but we will stop with this one, the remains of a religious temple called Qasr al-Bint. It's well preserved, but there's some assembly required. Having walked all day, we were ready to ride. Someone please wake our vehicles. Soon we were back at the treasury, facing a camera and feeling on top of the ancient world. For our farewell dinner, Tauck had promised a surprise. We were heading for what looked like a tomb. Not necessarily a good sign, but cocktails and dining were actually set up in a tent, Bedouin style. The food was amazing, as it had been throughout the trip. And for some who chose to partake, smoking a hookah was a new experience.
What happens in Petra stays in Petra.
The evening ended with Bedouin entertainment. Needless to say, we carried wonderful memories away from our time in Petra. The next day, we drove north to Jordan's capital city of Amman to catch our flights home. If traffic is a barometer, we were taking a major leap from third world rural countryside to a modern urban city of more than 4 million people. Jordan is a stable country that has been able to attract investment from oil-rich nations. Amman is a major banking center for the Middle East and is one of the most popular Arab cities for multinational corporations to set up their regional offices. The Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan was ruled by King Hussein from 1952 to 1999 and is now ruled by his son, King Abdullah II, who was born in 1962. In the year 2000, the king and his family welcomed Pope John Paul II, who was making a spiritual pilgrimage on the 2000th anniversary of the birth of Christ. On Mount Nebo, from which the Bible tells us the prophet Moses viewed the Promised Land, the Pope planted an olive tree as a symbol of peace. A monument on Mount Nebo honors Moses, who is revered by Jews, Christians, and Muslims alike. 22 years later, the olive tree has taken root. Hopefully, that's an omen. As our plane departed Amman, I reflected on what I had learned on this trip. Among the 3 major monotheistic religions in the Holy Land, I didn't know which was more divisive, theology or geography. I returned home with more questions than answers, but like the Pope, hoping for peace.